Welcome back to the Power Market Podcast. I'm Ryan McMakin, Editor-in-Chief at the Mises Institute, and with me today, I have Tho Bishop, one of our contributing editors here at the Mises Institute, and also Jonathan Newman, who is one of our economists, one of our research fellows here at the Mises Institute, and we're glad to have everyone here because we're going to talk about the Fed. And the Fed and its Federal Open Market Committee had a meeting. They concluded it yesterday, Wednesday. We're recording this on Thursday. And they lowered the target interest rate, the federal funds rate, the policy rate, whatever you want to call it. And that's now down to 4%. And so yet another reduction in the interest rate. And really no surprises there. I think the markets were all expecting this 25 basis point cut to bring it down even more. That means a reduction, though, over the last 13 months of 150 basis points, or a full 1.5 percentage points from where it had been early September of 2024. So we're very much in a cutting cycle as far as Fed policy goes. And I think it's really just a continuation of this return to easy money that has been going on for a number of months now. I think at the time we argued that there was really no need for, you even using the mainstream conventional thinking about does the Fed cut the interest rate or not, it didn't even fulfill really its own requirements back in September of 2024 because its own standard was that we need to get the inflation rate, the CPI price inflation rate, back to 2%. Well, it wasn't back to 2% last fall, and it's still not back to 2% here more than a year later. So it seems to me that they're just not very serious about reducing the overall inflation rate as measured by the CPI. This is price inflation that we're talking about here, not monetary inflation, for those of you who are sticklers about terminology when it comes to inflation.
And our readers are.
And then the other, of course, we have very exacting readers. This is the Power Market Podcast. So we're a little more casual with language here. For our written content, of course, we tend to be much more strict about that in terms of we're using the words inflation.
But their voices are heard and they are valued.
Yes. Don't at me, bro, as we used to say in social media. That's like 100-year-old slang at this point. I don't even know what is the proper terminology now. But so the Fed reduced the target rate again, clearly showing that A, they don't care that much about price inflation, and 2, they clearly think there's some sort of need for monetary stimulus, which would suggest that they think the economy is weak. And then the other side of it, too, which further leads into the easy money narrative on this, the idea that, they want more monetary stimulus, is that they now announced, Powell announced at the press conference after the FOMC meeting, that they're terminating quantitative tightening come December 1. So what they mean by that under the current context is that they're going to stop reducing the Fed balance sheet. So if you remember way back in 2008, the Fed started doing this new thing where they were buying up trillions of dollars of assets. A very new thing was that they were purchasing private mortgage-backed securities and putting those on the Fed balance sheet. This helped drive up home prices further, helped protect banks. It was basically a bailout of banks, which were heavy on mortgage-backed securities. Had the actual market demand been allowed to play out, a lot of this stuff's value would have plummeted. A lot of this mortgage-backed security stuff would have just been dumped in the marketplace, and it would have caused a lot of banks and quasi-banks to be underwater, essentially. So the Fed came in, printed up trillions of dollars, and bought mortgage-backed security. That was a key part of quantitative easing as it was occurring at the time. Now, through that also what the Fed was doing was purchasing huge amounts of treasuries, even more treasuries than mortgage-backed securities during that period, trillions of that as well, all with newly printed money. So this added trillions of dollars to the economy. They started to undo that a little bit in 2019, and then COVID happened, and then they bought trillions more of that stuff. So there's been sitting for more than 15 years on the books of the Federal Reserve, trillions and trillions of dollars of assets that the Fed bought with new money, created huge amounts of new monetary inflation. And However, starting in 2022, they started to allow a lot of those securities to mature and then roll off the books, so that the total amount of the Fed's portfolio got very slowly smaller. So it's been reduced by about $2 trillion now, out of what had peaked at $9 trillion or so. So that's stopping. And what they now say they want to do is reconfigure the total assets so that it's more focused on treasuries. So they're going to let the mortgage-backed security stuff roll off, and they're going to focus more on treasuries, which is totally par for the course, right? Their number one concern is stimulating demand for government debt to prevent government debt interest rates from climbing too high, which could be crushing for the federal government in terms of the interest that they have to pay on the debt. So they're going to do that. They're going to then move more toward being focused on government treasuries. And then also they want to bring down the number of long bonds that they have. They want to be less invested in these really long-term assets as well. So this is all stuff that Powell stated during the meeting. So there's a lot going on at this meeting. Reduction in the target rate, as well as the end of quantitative tightening, all of which points toward belief in weakness in the economy and also a disregard for the inflationary pressures that might create. So there's lots of good questions, I think. Unusually, there was more than one or two decent questions, I think, during this press conference that Powell did. So we can get into some of that in a little bit. But let's just kind of get your guys' reactions on these changes in policy. Jonathan, right, when you heard that they were cutting the rate, I mean, really, what was your initial reaction to this?
Well, I wasn't really surprised by it. I don't think anybody was surprised by it. Everybody was expecting that rate cut. What was surprising is some of the comments that he included at the beginning of the press conference. So part of his prepared remarks, he actually he made this interesting signal regarding the December meeting, and he was basically it's almost like he was trying to inject some uncertainty into markets by saying that it's not a foregone conclusion that we're gonna. He actually said foregone conclusion that we're gonna keep cutting rates, and so he's trying to keep everybody on the edge of their seats. I mean, one way to interpret that is, I mean, maybe that's sort of like a message to the people who are on the FOMC, because there were two dissents this time. Of course, the new guy, Stephen Myron, he once again dissented by saying he wanted a 50 basis point cut, just like last time. But there was another guy, I can't remember his name, who dissented, saying that he would have preferred no change in the rate cut. So I wonder if
that was Jonathan. That was the Kansas City guy. As a point. And I don't know what it is about the Kansas City Fed, but that seems to be where all the harder money guys hang out.
Good people.
That's been true for years. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, that's our raw Kansas City Fed District 10. I don't I don't know what's going on there. But yeah, that was the other guy. I can't remember his name. It was just the Kansas City Fed president.
Yeah, that was basically the end of what I was trying to say. I think Powell, maybe he was trying to sort of make a signal that the members of the FOMC, there's increasing amounts of dissent, at least compared to recent years. And so maybe he's trying to tell people that it's okay for us to be sort of unsure. He's sort of and this happened throughout the press conference. He was sort of alluding to the fact that there's lots of uncertainty. We're in this challenging situation because we have to balance the two sides of our dual mandate. And in the case where there's softening in the labor market, and also we're still not down to 2% price inflation, then that means that there's not really a clear path for setting the federal funds rate, because one of those mandates, one side of that mandate says interest rates should go up, and the other one says it should go down according to conventional thinking. And so I think maybe with that sort of comment, he was trying to maybe anticipate questions from the press about dissent, saying, we're all just trying to figure this out together, and so it's okay for people to have differing opinions. But that was definitely something new. I hadn't seen a Fed chair ever, say something like that. because remember he was saying, even though we've cut interest rates this time, we cut interest rates last time, we're not necessarily on a cutting cycle. We're not necessarily going to keep doing this. But since that happened, it looks like it seems like the market is still anticipating another cut in the December meeting. But it's definitely not as much. There's not as much certainty about that this time around. I think it's like down to like 60% chance based on market pricing of a cut in December. So I thought that was interesting and surprising.
So yeah, Tho, what was your reaction to the Fed announcement?
Again, I was most curious to see, and as Jonathan already alluded to, what Stephen Miron was going to do as the Trump presence on the board. Not surprised at all that he wanted something more aggressive than what Powell wanted there. It is this interesting dichotomy that you have going on right now. Like I wonder to a certain extent, right? Like, I mean, this is a rate cut. Again, could have been larger, but it was a rate cut. You have the end of QT. This is a fairly dovish approach by the Fed taking here, but they're projecting, right? Oh, well, the economy is going to go is still growing strong. How much of that is trying to play up the headline that Trump wants, right? Hey, look, the economy's doing great. Don't worry about it. Yet at the same time, it's the Trump folks that precisely want, a more an easier monetary policy, and so trying to square those two things from just a rhetorical battle in the grand politics of modern monetary policy is a very fascinating thing to see play out live. Clearly there seems to be some sort of return. It's kind of the forward guidance sort of component to it about forecasting. Creating that uncertainty that Jonathan mentioned on the December rate cut is going to be interesting. I'd bet the under on that if I could get some good betting odds out there right now. We'll see where things go there. But to your original point, Ryan, like I remember back early on in the process, I think it might have been like a Cato event that Jerome Powell was speaking at, and he talked about just how he was warning at that time, this was several years ago now, about how important it is for how dangerous it is for inflation beyond the 2% to creep into expectations, and how difficult it is to get that genie back in the bottle once that rises. And it seems that we have given up that battle, to your point. But again, Powell publicly warned about this several years ago. Like he recognized the dangers of allowing for an interest rate well above their target rate. And yet this is now completely on the back burner. And so he has become exactly what he warned about going in the past. And it's very interesting. I mean, the issues with QT, there's been some expectation that they were going to slow down or to freeze the balance sheet, with the very, very slow runoff that they've had. The expectations was that it was not going to be December 1st. A lot of the markets could kick in, but the full expectation going into this meeting was that it was going to be, a 2026 decision at the earliest. There are concerns. I mean, they're noting the rises in repo rates, the concerns about money markets, the concerns that there is some turbulence out there with the banking system as a whole. And so they're trying to project confidence, right? Don't worry, we know exactly what we're doing. They got a lot of questions from the media about, what is the wisdom of reducing rates at a time where you're trying to claim that the underlying data is very strong. And there's some very interesting quirks about some of the data that Powell was referencing, which I think we're going to talk about here in a bit. But it's this projection, hey, look, everything's great, the economy is going great, but we're also going to engage in monetary policy that completely goes against what we're trying to tell you and sell you on how great this economy that we find ourselves in right now. And again, it's this typical Fed talk. I mean, now this is particularly surprising, right? This is exactly what should have been expected. But it is very interesting to see in the very serious academic face of Jerome Powell, talk out of these two very conflicting dynamics here. But this is, of course, the joys of the Fedocracy that we have right now.
Before we go on, I just got to bring this up as a side issue, though. Did you see that interview with Myron and Sarah Eisen on CNBC, where she asked him what he thought was going to happen with inflation, and he said that's above my pay grade, and then shut up. He didn't say anything more. So there's just kind of an awkward silence, and then Eisen and then the crew, you could hear people in the studio laughing, like, what an absurd answer. And why are you here to give an interview if talking about inflation is above your pay grade? And then he talked a little bit about the Fed and how, well, they meet every 6 months in order to talk about these things. And then there's another awkward silence, and Eisen says, you mean every 6 weeks? He says, yeah, every 6 weeks. That's what I meant.
Well,
I wonder if he showed up to this meeting.
Haven't we always wanted more humility from our Fed members? He just... But I mean, it's
well, and of course, I don't I don't want to suggest that the other members of the FOMC are brilliant geniuses who are deep thinkers, but I it was kind of to your point right there, Tho, is right. This is such a deeply political game. It's all about messaging. There's no real interest in discussing real issues here or anything like this. They don't care.
Well, and to that point, right, is that, Fed speak is an important policy tool. Communication is an important policy tool. These have been bolstered in recent years. And so when you don't have the ability to speak Fed speak, and you kind of let that stuff play out on CNBC, like, it does matter. Like, it shouldn't, right? Like, this is the clown world that we're in. Like, I mean, this is really stupid stuff. But this is the stupid stuff that has been seen as something of institutional importance by the Fed. And so, like, as silly and ridiculous as this stuff is, it really does matter, because by the Fed's own standards of how to conduct itself, like, this is one of many, many, many examples of just a decline of norms, some of which is kind of public decorum.
Yeah, one interesting thing about the change in Fed speak, or the continuation of Fed speak, is that there was a change with this most recent press conference, because in the past, you watch one of these press conferences and Powell is constantly referring to how data dependent they are, constantly referring to how we're going to wait on the incoming data and then we'll make adjustments as we see fit. And then he had to make sort of a rhetorical change this time around, because I mean, it's hard to say that you're data dependent when a lot of the data that you depend on is not even there because of the government shutdown. And so, like, he sort of like shuffled his papers a little bit when he's like referring to the sorts of data that they were looking at. Like, they're looking at Indeed and a few other like private collectors of data that report on employment and job market stuff. And so I just thought that was really interesting. It's like he was sort of put in this corner by the lack of data availability from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so, like, at least that part of Fed speak, took a pause this time around, and it was fun to watch him just squirm around to answer those questions.
Well, back in my more naive days, right, I assumed the Fed was sitting upon a mountain of data that wasn't publicly released, right? I'm like, oh well, they don't need the BLS's employment data. They got their own thing, right? They have all these secrets. They have secret knowledge,
the good stuff
about the economy, right? And now they're sitting up there and they're saying, "Oh, we don't have the publicly released BLS data, so now we don't have anything. We have to rely on Indeed.com to get data about the employment situation." So either they're just like they're playing the long game and they're still hiding that they have secret information about the economy, or they legit don't.
I hear an excuse to cut another department right there.
I mean, just astounding. And there were quite a few questions about that from the media gallery. They're like, well, since you don't have any data, how do you feel about proceeding with policy? And he shifted his papers around, as you say, Jonathan, and he basically said, well, this is why we're proceeding with caution, is because we don't actually know what the economic situation is. Oh, fantastic. That's great to know. Thanks, guys. These are the people that we're told are like amazing forecasters and know what direction the economy is going. And so, the whole data dependency myth is, I think, just wearing down a whole lot, almost in real time, as we see how little it is. I mean, remember when the nation, believed in like forward guidance and that sort of thing, where like the Fed was functioning under this like long-term grand plan about how it was going to usher in the economy. And then they gave up on that. And then it was just, well, we're just waiting to see what data comes in next month and then we'll decide what to do with policy. Now they openly admit that they're like basically a few days ahead of policy decisions based on what data comes in. So that's a total difference in narrative from what we were being told 10 years ago, for example. So it's quite remarkable. And I want to go back to the issue with you, Jonathan, especially about the portfolio, the asset, the balance sheet, so this is the plan that he had stated. And I just want to see if it sounds plausible to you. I mean, maybe it is. So the idea here wasn't just that they would reduce, right, the balance sheet, or that they would stop reducing the balance sheet overall, right? As I said, the balance sheet has declined by a couple trillion over time. But it has become really dependent on a very large minority of assets were mortgage-backed securities. And so Powell said, we want to reduce that, and we want to reduce our long-term obligations or our long-term assets. Yeah, the opposite, right? Not the obligations, but the assets they hold, the long-term cash flow that's supposed to come in. They want to get that more down to short term, or at least a shorter term. And however, there was an interesting distinction in here is that so it's not like if they now stop quantitative tightening, what that means is they then are planning to maintain the size of the portfolio. So what they've been doing is it's not like they've been like selling off these assets per se. They've mostly been letting them mature and roll off. And so the portfolio's been getting smaller in that way. And that has had a monetary tightening effect, a mild one, but it works that way. However, what they're now saying they want to do is they're going to let this stuff mature, and then whatever income comes in at maturity, they're going to use the proceeds from that to purchase treasuries. So as mortgage-backed securities are allowed to roll off, they want to take whatever they can get from that and put that money into treasuries. Presumably, this would be then like monetarily neutral in a sense, right? In that, we're not going to print new money to purchase new treasuries. We're just going to use whatever money we got from the maturing MBSs and do that. Does that sound like something they could do without really creating new money? Is there going to be enough proceeds, as Powell kept calling it, coming off the MBSs to maintain the size of the portfolio? I really don't know.
I mean, theoretically, yes, they should be able to do that if they do it dollar for dollar. So if a certain amount of long dated assets are maturing, and so they come off of their balance sheet, and then they use the same amount to purchase shorter term securities, then yes, that wouldn't necessarily necessitate a change in the overall size of the Fed's balance sheet. But I think Powell was sort of vague in his explanation as to like why they were doing that. He was basically just saying we want the Fed's assets in terms of duration to match the outstanding, like the rest of the universe, I think he called it, of Treasury debt, so that what the Federal Reserve is holding sort of looks like what's outstanding from the Treasury. But I don't really like in that explanation. I don't really hear a clear reason as to why. Like what's the point? Why does it matter? Or what would be the benefit from their perspective of having a balance sheet that has a similar duration as the rest of the outstanding Treasury debt? I truly just don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. But I mean, it could have something to do with their ability to manipulate the yield curve in the future. So like if they have more shorter term debt in the future, that might make it easier for them to fiddle with short term return, short term interest rates in the future. Who knows? I'm not really sure. I haven't done enough research on that to be able to answer confidently. But I do think that Powell's the explanation that he gave was lackluster, or at least didn't convince me, or it did not explain to me why the Fed would want to do that.
So is there a political reason you see for that? Why they would want to go shorter term on their assets? I mean, nothing strikes out at me.
Yeah,
on that.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure on exactly what if Trump's browbeating him on that necessarily or not. I don't know if there's any concerns in international man or things like that. But I'm just sure there's probably a little bit of political influence in everything the Fed's doing these days, though.
All right. Well, let's look at some of the good questions, I think, from the audience on this one. And I think maybe to anticipate some of the questions, we have to look at what the Fed's reading on employment was for this time. And a lot of the questions led to, well, what's the employment situation, Chairman Powell? Is the economy good or bad? So Powell drew a lot on the usual sort of GDP growth thing. But I think people are starting to wise up a little bit to the GDP growth thing where, GDP's going up, and yet I have a terrible job and I can't pay my bills, right? Like I'm not benefiting from GDP going up. And there's a disconnect there. Lots of questions about the K-shaped economy. By lots, I mean 2 or 3, right? That clearly the people at the upper end of the income stratum are doing well. People down at the lower end are doing far less well. And so people are really, this is becoming part of the narrative, right? That people who have tons of assets, they're doing pretty well with Fed policy. People at the lower end, they don't seem to be benefiting that much, especially as inflation rates continue to go up. And so one of the things that really stuck out for me when Powell was asked about employment is he more than once really emphasized that things are okay as far as employment. He was really trying to have it both ways. He wanted to say that the economy was strong and stable, but at the same time had to admit that that there are significant challenges for people in terms of getting a job. That it's not easy to get a job. So he says things are strong and stable, but then turns around and says, well, when I say that the employment situation is stable, what I mean is zero net job creation. And so the explanation there was, yeah, there's not really any job creation. There's just not job cuts. So we talked about the hiring rate is very, very low, but also the job loss rate is very, very low. And so, sure, if you have a job, you're fine. And people aren't losing their jobs en masse, which is, by the way, he's kind of pushing his luck there, because this was just like the same day that huge amounts of new layoff information came out from Amazon and other firms. I mean, do you guys want to talk about that first before we move on? Just like the employment situation that Powell almost totally ignored. Right, there was a ton of negative employment news that day. I would think that would be more like of a political hot potato, wouldn't you?
Though,
yeah. I mean, it's if you're out there and people are saying, "Oh, 34,000 job losses at Amazon,"
right? That's the thing. He's trying to explain away why this isn't a problem. I mean, it's because that's not even used as like the justification. I mean, like, ultimately, what they're really pushing as a justification for the rate cuts is less the labor side than it is concerns about money markets, right? Like again, he's not trying to raise the bell there. He's trying to rationalize out why the job numbers really aren't as bad as some of these anecdotal reports are, right? And so even from that narrative aspect of it is that he's not leaning into this. Like, oh well, this is obviously why we've got to do more here, right? It's predicated on financial markets more than it is the labor market. And like, oh, well, the only reason the labor market's bad is because of immigration. But what's interesting though is you actually break down like the labor force participation rates. Like the biggest decline, like if you break it down by various demographics, the biggest decline is not Hispanic labor rates or whatever you typically associate with immigration labor. And how much the black markets in labor are probably figuring that it's a different sort of thing. But we're down 5% participation rate for working age white men. It's the biggest demographic that's been hit since the financial crisis. It has not recovered. It's the biggest drop off since COVID, since 2020 as well. So this is not just like the good old days of 20 years ago, right? But even since COVID. Like that is where a major aspect of the tightness in the labor market is coming from, is that you've got the participation rate has dropped significantly for working class, for working age white men. In particular, you look at other demographics, it's pretty flat from where it was. It's like 2 points lower for white women. Other minority groups, so it's pretty even for it was in pre-recession to pre-2008. And so like that aspect of like just trying to blame it on immigration, like, oh, we're deporting more workers. And so therefore that is what's really causing some of this sort of stuff. Obviously, like, that doesn't tie into some of the AI concerns or whatever, but like, that's where the real issue is. And that's what's being completely lost in their ways of trying to massage this narrative that ignores a lot of, the negative headlines when it comes to, jobs data that they're getting from Indeed.
Yeah, Jonathan, what's your overall reading on the employment situation? I mean, since they're relying on private sector stuff, is it really wise to get out there and say, when tens of thousands of people are slated to lose their jobs, there's no big real layoffs. It's just there's not a lot of hiring. I mean, will that message strike a lot of people as plausible? How long can they keep that up?
Well, another set of headlines that I've seen. So, of course, I've seen the big ones about like Amazon and other big employers are planning layoffs or starting layoffs. So I've also seen headlines about increases in graduate school applications and people trying to start graduate school. And I've seen that particularly with law schools. And so that's often a canary in the coal mine as well, because people see or are expecting not a lot of employment opportunities fresh out of their bachelor degree program, and so they sort of kick the can down the road and they enter graduate school instead. So that's another good indicator of things are not looking great in the job market, especially for fresh college graduates. Like the unemployment rate for a fresh graduate is much lower. I can't remember the exact figures, but I was looking at it a couple months ago, and it's just dismal. It's like the unemployment rate is very high for them compared to where it has been in the past. So that's just another part of the story. It seems like we have all these headlines. We're not getting data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics because of the government shutdown, and so it truly could be that things are a lot worse than what Powell was even sort of softly, cushioning himself with. It's like, we think that there's some problems in the labor market, so we're going to do this 25 basis point cut. But it seems like there's going to be some rough road ahead in terms of employment and for the economy in general.
Well, the next point I was going to make was Powell's tacit admission that the unemployment rate would be much higher than it is. If Trump hadn't deported so many people. Like, he didn't use the word deportation, and he didn't say it was a good thing, but while he was talking about how, there's not a lot of layoffs, but there's not any new hiring either, that there's basically net zero job creation. And then he goes on to say, yes, the supply of jobs is very low, supply of new jobs, right? Supply of jobs available to anybody who wants to get into employment now is very low. However, the supply of workers has gone down considerably. And what were two reasons for that he listed? He said, well, just overall workplace participation has gone down. And was the other reason the supply has gone down? Because so many immigrants have left the country. So he's basically just admitting to the sort of the Trumpist narrative that Americans were losing out on employment to immigrants, and I'm going to improve your employment prospects by deporting people. And here you have Powell saying, the unemployment rate would be higher if there hadn't been so many people deported in recent years, which I just thought was amazing. And nobody really followed that up with a question. But the answer is, what's the employment situation? Well, there's no new jobs. And thank goodness we deported all those people, or the unemployment rate would be much higher. That's what I got from Powell yesterday. So that's not exactly a ringing endorsement of the employment situation, I don't think.
Yeah, a similar sort of thing happened with the inflation. We're talking about this right before we started recording. He referred to tariff inflation, which is like a brand new term. I've never heard anybody say that sort of thing. And so I think like the PCE inflation, which is the main one that they look at, I think it's 2.8 or 2.9, something like that. But then he just sort of like pulled this number out of nowhere, it seems like, where he said, if we didn't have the tariffs, then actual PCE inflation would be like 2.3, 2.4. So we're actually, much closer to our 2% target than it really looks like because of these tariffs. And so it's like he's using the inflation thing as a cover for employment, and he's also using the tariffs as a cover for not meeting their inflation target of 2%. It's just sort of like interesting, like the scapegoating that's going on.
Well, somebody else, some wag on Twitter said, I guess Powell just invented a new inflation measure today. It's the non-tariff inflation rate. This is just something he threw out. Here's the section from the transcript of the actual exchange with a reporter. A reporter asked him about the inflation rate. And you're right, it was PCE. And that's personal consumption expenditure for normal people out there. This is the preferred inflation measure that the Fed uses. And in recent months, that's been like 2.8, 2.7, 2.9%, like really close to 3%. And so not close to the official 2% goal. So somebody asked him about it, and he just sort of, it's amazing what he just tries to wave away with a hand wave. He says, we estimate, people have different estimates of what that is, but it might be 5 or 6/10. He's talking about like how much effect that tariffs are having on the overall price inflation rate. He says, and so if it's 2.8 for the PCE rate, which is bad, right? That's way closer to 3% than 2%. then core PCE, not including tariffs, might be 2.3 or 2.4, in that range, something like that, Powell says. So that's not so far from our goal of 2%. So we look at that, and the thing about tariff inflation is the base case is that it will come and it will probably increase further. So what he's saying is if you take things that make PCE go up out of PCE is closer to 2%. So we measured PCE, gang, and it was close to 3%. However, we have decided to remove from the measure some things that are where prices are increasing. And lo and behold, it's close to 2%. I mean, what sort of nonsense is this? Well, we'll just blame it on tariffs. We are 100% back to the old Putin's price hike. Logistical problems are causing CPI to go up. Anything but money supply increase. And so it's really just remarkable.
It's even more than that because, again, like for one, like this is what the Fed, this is how the government's operated quite some time, right? They don't like an official price measure. They don't like a statistic that's going out that's becoming inconvenient. So we'll replace it, right? We'll take away food and energy, whatever, and we'll now use this as a different standard. Maybe interesting to see, is there any attempt to systematize this? What I do think is funny, though, and this is just a petty point, it's a superficial point, but like remember like the whole brouhaha over E.G. Atani and BLS and like all the freaking out, oh, he's going to manipulate the BLS statistics to benefit Trump. Well, here, like, and Powell can do this, right? He can just make up a measure, he can just refer to a measure, and like, and you don't have any of this sort of same sort of attention. Like, no one else is going to, you're not going to see this on CNBC. Oh, Powell's creating a new measure. And it just, again, this is obvious. This is low hanging fruit, whatever. But it is just funny how, like, it's a national tragedy, right? People were crying over the integrity of these cherished government statistics over here. And yet the Fed chair just throws something out there. It's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Whatever. But all through the serving to the point of justifying, what are the current policies. Again, like this is an obvious point, but it's just funny seeing it play out in real time quite as frivolously as it was in this meeting.
Yeah, this is not something that Powell has submitted in writing with like a footnote explaining the method for how did we calculate non-tariff inflation. It's just something he said and throws it out there like, yeah, we don't have to worry about price inflation because it's really like 2.2% if you just take out tariffs.
I'm sure he worked on it really hard on the back of a napkin at a luxury gourmet restaurant in DC.
Well, it is going to be something because at some point, right, there's going to have to be some change into how do you bring back the integrity of the Fed from their targets, right? And so is it going to be? There's a lot of conversation about okay, we're 2% isn't actually optimal, and so therefore we're going to increase because we all know 2% is optimal, right? Or they're going to have to create a new measure. And so I'm interested to see, is this just something thrown out there and it's just a one-off, right? Like this is kind of a, this is a pilot. We'll see if it airs or not. Or is there going to be some sort of effort to, rather than raise the Fed's target rate, are they going to try to redefine it with another measure? Obviously, the tariff thing doesn't quite work as well because, assuming that tariffs are a relatively temporary program one way or another, whether it's political change or courts or however that plays out, winning negotiations, right? However that plays out. But it will be interesting to see, is there future attempts to create a measure that allows for the cover that they need to have, the sort of credibility that the Fed expects to project, or is it going to be something more severe than that going forward?
They will always be able to come up with something. This is something. There's a great. Milton Friedman, for all of his faults, he had some good, one-liners. He was in some talk that he gave, he was talking about how the Fed causes inflation and how he was doing his research for his big book on the history of money in the United States. And he said, if you read through the reports from the Board of Governors throughout the history of the Fed, you'll see this common theme that when things are going great, the Fed is taking all of the credit. They'll say, we have done so much to create this, prosperous situation. It's because of our hard work, because of our, wise, technocratic management of the economy, we're able to bring about this great situation. But when things turn bad, when you have a recession or excessive price inflation, then the rhetoric always changes to, despite our best intentions, factors outside of our own control have worked to create this terrible situation. So this is something that even Milton Friedman decades ago noticed. And like you can see throughout the entire history of the Fed, whenever they're making these pronouncements, they're always able to point to something, deflect in a certain way, find a scapegoat to take the responsibility for bad things happening away from themselves. But then, of course, when things are going great, when things are fine, people aren't unhappy, then they can say things like, "It's like we're doing our job for the American people."
Yeah, it's quite remarkable how would they just end up looking great no matter what out of that. I mean, Jonathan, would you say that on a de facto, like we don't even have to look to the future to see, will they change the inflation standard? It seems to me that on a de facto basis, the 2% inflation measure is dead. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. I'm not even sure that, I'm not even sure de facto it's ever been there because, it's always, bouncing around. I mean, maybe just depending on the chair, depending on who's on the committee, maybe they actually were sort of committed to 2%. But I mean, even 2% is completely arbitrary. You can find dozens of articles on the Mises website about that. But yeah, so the fact that they're cutting rates now, when Powell for years has been saying how committed he was, how important it was for the FOMC to get the price inflation down to 2%. I mean, just shows like, I guess all of that was just lying because we still, since the great, inflation of 2022, we still have not seen a single report of something close to 2%. So we're still, hovering up above it. So, I mean, you were talking about the credibility of the Fed going into the future. I mean, this is actually a good thing. I think it's losing credibility every day. Every meeting is losing credibility. And you sort of see that in some of the questions that are asked of the Fed at these press conferences, because it seems like they're, I've been watching these press conferences for a long time, and like in the past, they were all softballs, like all like sort of really easy questions. And like there's still a bunch of softballs, still a bunch of things that's like easy for Powell to respond to. But like underneath the questions in like these more recent meetings, especially since COVID, there's some more like underlying criticism of what the Fed is doing. It's like there's more of like a few meetings ago you said this, but now you're doing this. So there's more of those sorts of questions or questions about. Like what I brought up earlier, it's like you guys say that you're always, dependent on the data, but now you don't have this data. So what's really guiding your policy choices now? And so that's good to see. That's good to see that there's, some more, pushback from the journalists in the room. Although I would ask some very different questions if I were in that room. I sort of dream about that one day, as being in there at one of those press conferences and being able to ask some of my own questions. But the unfortunate thing about this is that even though the journalists are, there's more of a critical underlying tone in some of their questions, Powell is still, engaging in Fed speak. He's still, being political in his responses, and at least so far, he's been able to rhetorically play the game so that at least from his perspective, he doesn't look like a complete failure. He's still able to sort of, cushion and do the scapegoating.
Well, given all the rotation and changes to media credentials, I'm just excited for, maybe there's a possibility to get a Zero Hedge or InfoWars media credential for a future FOMC meeting. That'd be
or Mises Institute.
Well, that'd be great to me. One thing that's interesting to your point, though, if you look at Google Trends, there's a massive increase in attention to the FOMC, which I just use that as just kind of a more sterile, less sexy sort of search topic. But you see a noticeable increase starting with about 2022, understandable with inflation rates and all this sort of stuff, and Biden, whatever. But it hasn't gone like it's about twice or plus, depending on the peaks and valleys that you get with that data. So there's a lot more attention from normal people about these decisions, about the Fed. And like that's a bad thing for the Fed. Like the Fed likes to operate in the shadows. The Fed likes to be boring. The Fed likes to only show up on Bloomberg occasionally for in terms of news. And that's been consistent for years now. Is that just in terms of Google Trends was the best you can get, in just in terms of mass sort of interest component to it. Like it's a very striking visual there, and I think that goes to some of the challenges. And again, I'm not surprised to see. And what's interesting about this questioning in particular, relative to, like, say, last meeting, is that even though there's definitely certain political angles, right? There's not a ton of Trump focus on this the same way that you had last time when a lot of the demonstration was on Mirren, right? Obviously, there's aspects that play into it. When you touch on things like immigration, whatever. But it's not like he was being asked about Trump all the time, right? But you still have a little bit more of that adversarial, a little bit more of that questioning, that little skeptical sort of component to it. Which again, massive shift in how the financial media treats these sort of events.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily for the better. I mean, it is good that there's more eyes on the Fed, especially from like ordinary people. But you also get like these crazy headlines all the time that just like mention the Fed. So like if you go to Yahoo Finance or like or Bloomberg or anything, there's like some slight change in the S&P 500, and they'll say stocks slip as investors await Fed decision. It's like they're just waiting on the Fed, and then somehow that means that there's a decrease in equity prices. It's just like some like absurd headlines that you see all the time. Like you see sometimes the opposite. It's like the same sort of thing is occurring. Like we're 2 days away from what everybody widely expects to be a 25 basis point cut or something like that, and somehow that is supposed, in the minds of readers of these headlines, is supposed to be, obviously that means stocks go up, or obviously that means stocks go down. It's like in these headlines from financial media, it's just like absurd sorts of stuff. But what's interesting about that is that does show that at least more people are realizing how much of a big player the Fed is in financial markets. So like even though like sometimes there's like zero logic at all in those headlines, at least people are starting to realize, more people are realizing that what the Fed does has huge consequences. Because as you said, though, like in the past, like nobody was paying attention to the Fed. Like go back before Ron Paul's presidential campaigns, and especially, and like you would bring up the Federal Reserve and people are like, what is that? But nowadays there's more and more people aware of what it is, what it does, and that it has big consequences.
To the point, right, of how the questions have changed over time, I think that's like almost obvious if you just go back, say, 18 months or 2 years, how much the skepticism has increased, how less deferential the questions are now. There's still a lot of stupid questions, like kind of what Tho was talking about. Since even though they weren't talking about Trump this whole time, they were still fishing for any drama that they could get, like, well, it seems that there was some disagreement on the board this time. Can you tell us about the drama? Like it's a reality TV show or something. Tell us about the arguments you had. Right. It's like reality TV for ugly people. And so I'm like, please, can we have a real question? And there were some. One area that I thought was really interesting was on this issue of AI, and he got a couple of questions on this. And one of the questions, the first question about AI was, well, you're always talking about how there isn't really a bubble of any kind. This isn't a bubble economy. But looking at AI, stocks, right? Looking at just the AI industry in general, wouldn't you say, Mr. Chairman, that maybe that constitutes a bubble? Because there's a lot of awareness in financial Twitter about how the stock market is basically driven by like 10 stocks. Right. It's all of these AI-related stocks, right? And it's gone parabolic, and real economy stocks are like flat or going down as people run out of money to go out to restaurants and things like this. Chipotle, which has cratered in recent days because they say nobody has money to spend anymore. And that's a growing narrative outside the AI world. But someone, tweeted this morning saying that NVIDIA is now, the market cap for NVIDIA is now 16% of US GDP. I mean, you look at those sorts of numbers, and so the reporter was asking, well, wouldn't you say that was a bubble? And Powell said, well, I don't believe that money, that it depends on interest rates. He said, I don't think interest rate policy affects very much these stock prices. He says, I don't believe. He didn't present any actual data or anything. He just said, it's my opinion that interest rates don't really affect these huge stock prices that are growing up around AI. And that, that's not a bubble created by easy money. He said it's like speculative narratives, and it's just popular to buy AI stocks right now. It doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing at the Fed. Now, Brendan Brown, our senior fellow, we're here. he would have like a heart attack hearing such a stupid thing uttered, right? Because while he would agree that, yes, it's a speculative narrative, but those speculative narratives only get legs when there's a bunch of money sloshing around so you can do something with that speculative narrative and just hysterically pour money into an AI firm. I mean, in the past, it was the FANG stocks, right? And now it's switched over to the AI stocks. And so he just waved that aside. He's like, nah, our interest rate policy has nothing to do with the stock bubble there. And then later, I think this maybe earns the award as the best question of the day. This is from Michael McKee.
Yes,
who delivered,
he's my favorite in the room. Yeah,
he's a smart guy.
Yeah,
and so he even delivered the question with a bit of a smirk. So that makes it even better. Where he said, okay, well, you're talking about how we need lower interest rate, we need more accommodative, less restrictive policy in order to create more jobs. And just as an aside, right, the Fed still maintains that it's in a moderately restrictive monetary stance, which I don't think is true, but he's still maintaining that they're still on the restrictive side of things. And so we're moving a little bit more toward less restrictive, he's saying. So McKee raises his hand and he says, okay, well, you're saying we're going to move toward less restrictive. He says, but you surely know, Mr. Chairman, that easy money policy contributes to asset price inflation. He's like talking to Powell like he's 6 years old. He's saying, so easy money drives up asset prices, right? So he then says, so if you're easing money, won't that actually contribute just more maybe to AI stock prices and more of an AI bubble, which seems to actually create job losses? So he created this awesome narrative where he's like, Mr. Chairman, isn't it possible that Fed policy to ease money is simply going to feed more money into AI firms, which will then expand AI throughout the larger economy and then result in job losses? So actually, isn't easy money creating unemployment? Which I thought was just a like chef's kiss sort of question. And then Powell just went back to the whole, I just don't believe that easy money contributes to the AI economy. That was it.
It's the most absurd answer to say that it's not interest rate sensitive. Like, of course it is. And in fact, even in Powell's response, he contradicted himself, because when he was talking about like people who are investing in this, they consider it like this like sort of speculation. They're thinking about the money that they can earn in the long run. And he actually referenced net present value, which, to calculate net present value, you need an interest rate, you need a discount rate to be able to do that. And so, of course, if you push down the discount rate, then that's going to increase the net present value of those future cash flows. So, I mean, it's just completely absurd. And like, he couldn't even be consistent in his own response. So, yeah, I wasn't having a heart attack like Brendan Brown would. I was just like laughing while he was saying that stuff.
So, yeah, I don't think Powell came out of that meeting looking especially brilliant. And I think that's probably just that comes back to your narrative, Jonathan, which is that when the economy is going well, no one questions the Fed. The Fed can just smoothly sail through all of these meetings, and everybody thinks, "Wow, the Fed's brilliant." But once things start to look a little uncomfortable, people start to get a little concerned about employment. The Fed just doesn't seem to have any answers. So, I mean, politically, though, where does Powell go from here? Like, what's the Fed's big move politically in terms of just making sure that they continue to come out smelling sweet as the employment situation worsens?
Well, I think Powell's probably happy that no one's talking about the Fed renovation anymore, so that's a step in the right direction. But I mean, it's again, I think the idea that again, everything's good now. December, we're gonna stay easy. Everything's going great. Like, again, it's going to be interesting to see. I don't think that the administration particularly likes that. Again, if you want to know how the administration thinks about monetary policy, look at what Stephen Morin's saying. It's as difficult as that might be at times. And so they want more. And so if Powell is really committed, if Powell's going to try to take this position come 2 months from now, and try to not further ease. I mean, that's what the administration is going to want. They pump, but baby pump, and so this was perhaps a slight decrease from the political tension of last meeting, but that inner tension is not going away anytime soon.
Jonathan, what do you think? Leave us with some wise words as we conclude the episode.
Wise words. The Fed is losing credibility. It's fun to watch. Like I get a lot of entertainment value out of watching these press conferences. I'm just sort of lucky that it's a part of my job to do that sort of thing. And I'm so glad that you agree with me that Mike McKee is like the greatest journalist in the room. Actually, Mark Thornton, whose office is right next to mine, he has said the same thing. That Mike McKee is he often has like the best questions, and he does a really good job of like sneaking in these sorts of like you're saying this line, but if you think about it in this way, then it's actually going against it's going against your rhetoric. So he's great. In terms of like what's going to happen in the future, I'm anticipating some big political battles, some big headlines regarding who Trump nominates to be the next Fed chair, what Powell tries to do. Is he going to try to stay on the board? All those sorts of things. So I guess I don't have any wisdom. I'm just, looking forward to, eating my popcorn and watching.
All right. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this all-Fed episode of Power and Market Podcast. Thank you, everyone out there, for tuning in. By the way, we've got some events coming up, right? We have, we just concluded our supporter summit. I know in February, I will be in Oklahoma City. We'll have a Mises Circle going on there talking about entrepreneurship. So keep an eye out for more on that in February. Don't we have an episode? We have an event coming up in Michigan soon.
Yeah, this weekend.
Yeah, this weekend.
Yeah, in Grand Rapids,
this weekend,
Michigan,
okay.
For students. It's going to be great. It's going to be why the economy is failing Generation Z. I have a feeling the Federal Reserve, we brought up a time or two at that one. So we'll also have some video content hitting our media channels, in the aftermath of that. And after February, one event I always recommend, our two research conferences that will be in March of next year in beautiful Auburn, Alabama. The Libertarian Scholars Conference and the Ashram Economics Research Conference. If you've ever been interested in presenting an academic paper, either on libertarian theory or on economics and why the Fed is not our friend, consider submitting a proposal there. Always a great time. Or come watch, see the cutting edge research in Ashram Economics.
All right. Well, I think that'll be it for this week. We will be back next time with more. So we'll see you then.